Hello, welcome back to the 2020 Vision Pro. This is part 3. I think I'll just dive right in and we can take a look at what we're going to be looking at today. So, the 2020 Vision Pro, we have a new meta paradigm for the structural elements of life system. Meta paradigm being a perspective essentially on an overarching look at life. So, moving forward. Part 3, civilization and the misfunctional meta paradigm. Take a look at where we've come from, reflect on that, and then we'll jump forward. So part 1, we created the armature for this exercise, the structural elements of life system. We kind of looked at what that is. We then applied it to metaphorical analysis of a life system as a building. Then we took a look at the metaphorical synthesis of life system as a being. In part 2, I gave you my hypothesis, which is looking at life as the view of the misfunctional meta paradigm. Then we took a look at our life system as a culture. Today, we'll be applying that structural elements of life system to culture and kind of compare how that operates with the building and being that we've established as well. This will lead to the 2020 Vision Probe formally, an observation of life, and then we'll look forward into 2021 and beyond with the conjecture and conclusion. 6, the misfunctional meta paradigm in the structural elements of life as a culture. Comparative behavior. So let's dive right in. What do we have here? This is kind of bringing everything together in a complex but complete view of life. So in part 2, we looked at civilization as in our structural elements of life system and how the civilizations function. And I would say function properly. And what I have here is also, in addition to that, taking a look at the misfunctioning elements of life as a building, and then the misfunctioning elements of life as a being. With life as a building, that's the levels of the floors that would be operating in an incorrect way. And then with life as a being, that would be the incorrect functioning of a being's cognitive functions. And that will lead us to the misfunction in civilization. So, where in a building the misfunction of the basement floor beginning, wherein if someone's in a prison cell, what they are going to be experiencing as a being mentally is detachment. This detachment is brought upon by restriction. With the resource consumption in an economy, we have in a building, this would be represented by as a metaphor. Remember, this is a metaphorical exercise, a metaphorical application, a barrier of the first floor. This barrier would be inequality, which leads to deprivation. In the non-material division or elements of life, ignorance leads to inequity. And kind of a result of that, a member of society would need to seek refuge from inequity. In the material aspect of life, we have government, which is creating order in our products of life or systems of life of ownership. And what would be a misfunction of a building's space of material elements is the refusal of these elements. In other words, a rejection, which is the misfunction in a being. This causes, if we're wasting our materials, this causes disorder in government and in life alike. With exertion, we're thinking about science and technology, preservation and conservation. The misfunction or manipulation of these working aspects of life would be exploitation. finally, with the end, and we think about media and communication in our civilization, kind of represented by the satellite antenna array in the building, and communication, as misfunctioning would cause alienation. That leads to paranoia in people's lives. So kind of as a review, the misfunction of connection would be restriction. The misfunction of provisions is inequality. The misfunctions of liberty is inequity. The misfunction of order is disorder. And the misfunction of the preservation and conservation of exertion is exploitation. And the misfunction of communication would be alienation. So with that, let's move forward to an observation of life today, which is the 2020 Vision Pro. Wherein civilization's components have each been individually compromised, demonstrates a complete reorientation to a misfunctional meta-paradigm. Culture in this moment can be viewed as operating in a misfunction movement. What I'm going to do now, again, this is observation of the present state of culture today in 2020. We're going to be applying these, seeing if the application of misfunction can apply across from the metaphors of the building and being into civilization, which is applicable to our life today. So we'll take a look at this starting from the beginning. Prison cell in the building does lead to detachment in a being. And what I want to say about a prison cell is that a prison cell is different from a jail cell. A jail cell is where, someone would await trial, and that's a short-term moment. A prison cell is when someone's given a guilty sentence, and it is a long-term containment. So there's the civilizational element or the institutional element of a prison, but this is kind of taking a step back and looking at what can arrive when our source of connection is misused, essentially. The institutions being our source of connection is misused. The present state of culture is in a pandemic. This is essentially causing a restriction of our institutions, which is leading to a detachment of our society. Think about adolescent education today. The children are not available or not able to go to school. This is a definite restriction. If we look at the structural elements of life system of resource consumption, our life today, and essentially which has been the case for the past 10 years, we have top-end expansion versus general contraction of life. This is represented in the 99% movement against the 1% top-end expansion. This kind of state is essentially a barrier in life and is due to inequality. With our society, the non-material, which again is family, friends, interaction of people. In this division of civilization today, there is injustice. And this is something that has been ever present, but growing in our public discourse. We look at what's happened this summer with the Black Lives Matter movement. This is a direct cause of inequity. This inequity being caused by ignorance. Now, what I want to say about the misfunctional element of the building of the refuge, well, that sounds like a basically positive space. We think about prison cell, barrier, a refuse space. These are negative connotations of a building, the functions of a building. Refuge sounds positive. However, if we think about this being an immaterial space, if someone in a society is faced with inequity, they don't have kind of a space to go to because their society is rejecting them due to ignorance. So the refuge in the end, being non-material, is their mind. They can only retreat to their mind for a refuge against inequity. This brings to mind the idea of Viktor Frankl's book, Man's Search for Meaning, where in order to survive a hostile or inequitable situation, the antagonist retreats into their mind in order to survive, essentially. So this is not quite a pleasant space to be in for thinking about a misfunction in the building. Moving forward with the government, we have global political disruption today. This is due to disorder in our government. And what I want to say about that is the root word of refuse, which is the state of misfunction of our building, is to refute. And what that is basically is, in today, we have a refutal of society, of we thinking about, particularly in American society, the left and right sides of government. We have a refutal versus refutal, which is a complete rejection of each other. We're thinking about conservative versus progressive. That's causing complete disorder, the rejection of society's government. Moving forward, we can see this is a misfunctioning government. Moving on to science and technology, which is our exertion. What I want to talk about today is how we are moving from a written society to a cyber oral one. Industry today is moving into an immaterial economy. This is kind of important when we think about the misfunction in our building from a factory to a lab to a data center. So the data center being, how our personal private information is being used in this immaterial economy or in a material society. What I want to do is apply again the concept of biopower by Foucault, where basically he recognized scientific knowledge as a means for control, social control. For example, in the 18th century or the 1700s, madness was used to categorize the mentally ill, the poor, the sick, and the homeless. And no doubt this categorization of madness was a manipulation of scientific knowledge and exploitation of people. This was commercially driven in a way of organizing the exertion of society, basically manipulating the exertion of people in society. And that's basically, I posit, where we are today with data centers acting in a commercially driven fashion. I'd say data centers, and moving forward with the end, social media as well, certainly commercially driven. In the media, if we think about what the function of media today is, there's an addictive quality, social media as well, and we do see a post-truth element to that. And certainly with news agencies, fear mongering as a way of gaining views or a commercial gain. This brings us to the idea of paranoia. This is definitely in beings in society who are affected by the media. There is an alienation and paranoia element to that. If we think about reflecting on society, we've moved away completely from looking at kind of internally in a reflection to death to looking outward to others, basically in paranoia and fear. So that's what we're looking at with the 2020 Vision Probe, where again we have the ideas of economy versus science and technology, society in relation to government, and institutions in relations to media. And so today in our society, we have inequality, exploitation, inequity and disorder, restriction and alienation. Taking a look at our 2020 Vision Probe, this brings us to the fact that we are in a misfunctional meta-paradigm. Now, let's not end there because that's quite a dire situation. Let's look forward with a conjecture and conclusion. So looking beyond, certainly different cultures and peoples have experienced a misfunctional meta-paradigm related yet distinct from the one we are now in. Misfunctional existence operates in dynamic imbalance, which is unsustainable. As such, it could be catalyst to wholesale change. If a shift to equilibrium were to happen, there would be a reversion to the functional meta paradigm. This pertinent reclassification would be contingent on a return to function, for which supporting evidence would need to arise. How does society cope with the misfunctional meta paradigm? Realizing that there is a problem is the first step. Re-examining each of the structural elements of life is the next step, and in fact necessary. I believe that we can find an opportunity for change in the misfunctioning divisions of culture by applying the structural elements of life system to our own individualities. Does detachment, deprivation, ignorance, rejection, manipulation, and paranoia play a part in our everyday lives? I believe they do, and I can help. I'm going to be taking the sales elements of life system and going live moving forward to help you navigate the misfunctional meta paradigm of life. That concludes the 2020 Vision Probe. Watch my channel for more information on how to watch me help you navigate this new life that we live today.